In this episode, we talk about efficiency versus perfect technique with a barbell. All right, this question's from Chacon. How would you say this? Chacon Jr. Amen? J. Raymond? Ramen? Chacon Ramen? I'm sorry. The question is, Mike, how do you know when to focus on efficiency rather than on perfect Oli technique while barbell cycling? I think it depends on what you mean by efficiency and what the specific task is. So the efficiency needs for setting up for an Olympic lift, like in a scenario like a weightlifting meet, is very different than the setup for like a 1 rep max snatch at the end of a CrossFit Metcon, which is very different than the setup and the efficiency needs for doing something like touch and go snatches in Isabel. So efficiency is like always a concern, right? I'm always thinking about trying to move the bar as efficiently as possible, but what that means in terms of efficiency is dependent upon the task itself. So the example is like if I'm in a meet doing a 1 rep max snatch, like I'm trying to create as much tension as I can. I'm trying to move the bar as efficiently as possible so that I can produce the most power in that one instant setting, right? Versus if I'm trying to do a 1 rep max snatch at the end of a Metcon, my breathing is super high. I have to be very fast about how I create tension, but then also very loose when I go down to set up, so I'm not restricting my breathing. So the demands are a little different. And then you take something like Isabel, for example, where you're doing like 30 touch and go power snatches. The setup there is, efficiency there means like the setup is very different than what you would need to set up and how you would create tension for something like pulling a 1 rep max, right? So you need to be very loose that you move the barbell as efficiently as possible. You know, your midline is slightly braced so that you actually are moving it cleanly, but it's not so tense and so over braced that you're restricting your breathing and actually losing power as a result of that, or using excess power as a result of that. So I think that having like all these different tools in your toolbox, you know, not just having one type of snatch to go to, but having all these different snatch variations is going to be helpful if you're doing something like CrossFit and you need to and you want to be better at like moving the barbell, because there are just a bunch of different demands for moving the barbell in the sport of CrossFit. You know, those examples I just gave, like, you know, a very non-fatigue based setting, moving a 1 rep max snatch like in a competition, or moving it under high fatigue when, you know, your grip might be blown out from toe to bar, or your quads are already tired, your respiration's super high, so it's like really hard for you to control your breathing and actually set a good brace. That's a different demand. And then the other would be like moving touch and go snatches in a really high rep setting where you don't have the ability and you don't want to waste too much time like setting up down in the bottom, getting this really strong brace to move 135 pounds. So you need to kind of find a balance of how much tension to create, when to be really tight in positions and when not to be, so that you can kind of you know, base your efficiency dependent on the skill that you're trying to do. Another thing I want to add was you know, the way you move a barbell for something like doing touch and go snatches at like a really fast rate may not look efficient, but it is efficient for the task that you're doing at that time, right? So someone who sets up for a barbell that's trying to do a set of almost 30 unbroken power snatches is going to look very different than someone setting up for a 1 rep max power snatch, right? The hips might be set higher, the chest is going to be a little bit lower, just because you don't need to create the exact same setup and like drive from the hips as you would if you're doing a 1 rep max snatch.
When I created Training Think Tank, I wanted it to be just that, a think tank, a group of people that gets together and challenges each other's ideas on training. So what you watch in this video is one coach's beliefs. The other coaches and myself may or may not agree with what was said, but we're okay with that because we want to facilitate a discussion about training in the market.